So let's start by trying to solve the very first problem in Leetcode. It's called TwoSum. Now you are presented with a data structure called nums, and nums is a data structure of type list, and the elements of the list are fixed at integers, so it can only hold integers. Let's read the problem statement. So each input has exactly one solution, and we can't use the same element twice. The problem statement basically gives us a collection or a list of integers, which are just numbers, and we basically just need to pick two distinct elements and return their locations in the input data structure nums. And those two elements, the sum of those, the result of an addition operation on the two of those elements, need to equal to the value inside the target variable. Now, first I want to teach you what data structure is being used in the input. So target is just a standard variable. So this is not really a data structure. What is a data structure? It's a collection of different values, to put it very simply. So the data structure here is a Python list, which is a type of dynamic array. If you're coming from C++, it is the equivalent of vectors, of a vector, and there is really no implementation of a static array in Python. So if in the problem statement you're given an array, a collection of some data types, you sort of have to assume that it is a dynamic array in Python always. So, and the elements of an array are accessed by simply pointing to their location. So to get to 2, I just pick the 0th value. To get to 7, I just pick the first value. To get to 11, I pick the second value, and then to get to 15, I pick the third value. So this is how the elements are accessed. And then I can also access all the elements using just 2 lines of code by using a repetition operation, which is called a loop. So I can just create a variable called index, which starts at the very first value of nums, which is 0. Remember that in programming, the counting starts from 0, not from 1, from 0. So if the length of a data structure is 4, it has 4 values, and the count starts from 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 values. So to access all its elements, I can just do while index is less than 4. If the length of the input array is 4, but since we don't know what the length of the input array is, we can just get the length by using length of nums. What this would return 4, and which is why I do index is less than 4, not less than equal to 4. So, and this is the same as doing while true, which creates an unlimited loop. It's always going to run unless you write a condition to break out of it. So that was the same as doing if index is greater than or equal to length of nums, break. So once it arrives at 4, it would just stop examining, like looking, sort of the loop would stop executing. Now nums of index, print nums of index. I'm just trying to show you how a loop works. I will just print out the values present in each of the index of nums, right? And then we just, after looking at that value, we can just do index is equal to index plus 1, right? So index, the value of index on the first loop will be 0, and it will be incremented to 1. I can show you. So print index is equal to index. So let's see what it gives us. So std out, as you can see, here are all the elements. How do I know that? So I'll show you how I know that. So nums index is equal to so 0th value is 2, first value is 7, second value is 11, and third value is 15, and then we just keep incrementing it. And as soon as this condition is met, so for example, once the index turns into 4, it evaluates to length is equal to nums, which is 4. Then I can just break it, fall out of the loop. So this is how we access all the values of an array. Now I'll just leave it here, maybe for your reference, I don't know, although this would make the whole thing a bit more confusing because the length of code will grow, and of course the spelling of length is also wrong, so not exactly, and we didn't really use this variable, so let me just delete that. And index is also not something we're going to use in our solution. So this is all commented out. This is how you create multiple lines comment in Python. You create 3 quotes, it's called a triple quote, and then you end it with triple quote. So that's a multi-line. Everything in between these two symbols, everything between 2 triple quotes will be treated as a comment and therefore not a part of our real code that would be executed, aka compiled, if you're coming from C++ or something. Another way to write comments is just using a hashtag. So this will not be executed, only for reference. So now let's jump to the mathematical part of how to try to solve this problem. So we are looking for elements that sum up to the target. What is my target? It is 9. And just by looking at the array, you can see that 2 plus 7 is equal to target. Now, and why? Because nums 0 plus nums 1, nums 0 plus nums 1 is equal to target, right? So, of course, your sensory input was enough for you to find out the two target value, to find out the 2 input values that would lead up to target, right? But let's say that this array was a bit longer. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 31. Yeah, 31 is fine. 32, 12, 32, 0, 9. Then I don't know, 92, and that your target was 10, or let's say your target was 40. So now how would you solve it? Well, basically what you do is you just pick this, you sort of nums 1, nums 0, and then you just check it against all the rest of the values. And first you check it against num 0 plus nums 1, and you check its value. It should evaluate to 3, right? How? So 1 plus 2 is equal to 3, right? Then what you do is it stays locked, value target not met. You move on to the next integer. 1 plus 31 is 32. No, it's not equal to target. Then nums, what you do is increment it again, and then this time this is going to be 32 is equal to 33. No, not met. So nums 4, which is 12. So 12 plus 1 is equal to 13. then increment it to 5, which is 92, which is equal to 93, and then 1 plus 9, the last variable, which is sixth value, which is equal to 9, and it adds up to 10. So value is not found. Switch over to the next variable, which is after 0, which is 1. Then you start all over again from the value to the right of the value that we've currently picked. So it would be 1 plus 1, which is 2. The first value is 2, then nums 2 is 31, which is 33. So on and so forth. I'll just do some more examples. So 2, then it increments to 3. 3 is 32, which is equal to 34. Then it increments to 4. 4 is 12. Then it turns into 14. So on and so forth. So it will go on until we finally arrive at the value of 40, which is 32, 31 plus 9, which is second element and sixth element. Right, so once we get there, it turns into 40, and which is 31 plus 9, 40. So how do we do that in principle? So we need two variables, and we just need to check if it's equal to target. So the equation we would be using is basically just nums first plus nums second, and check it against target. So whenever I try to create an integer, let's say I want to create an integer x, and I want to give it value 10. So this is the right hand value. To the right of the assignment operator, a single equal to is the assignment operator, and the value on the left is the name of the data type, so in this case x. So this would just assign the value of 10 to x, and it can have different types of mathematical operations, sum, division. It can also have, what this operator does is that it gives you the remainder of against, let's say, 2. It would either be 0 or 1, because a remainder is, anything divided by 2 gives you the remainder of either 0 or 1. 0 if the value to the left of this operator is even, otherwise it would throw 2. This is also a method to check whether the value is even or odd, right? And then, but this double equal to operator, what it does is it essentially checks the value on the left against the value on the right. So if this is the expression, since the value on the left is not equal to the value on the right, it returns false. Otherwise, if the two values are equal, it returns true. This is a comparison operator. It's not an assignment operator. So we just need to use this operator to check whether the value on the right, which is target. So the input in this case is 9, and we need to check whether the first and the second values equal to target. Now here's the thing. We are not allowed to use the same element twice. So we need to make sure that the value of first and second are distinct. So we are picking two distinct elements that sum up to target. So building on our original logic, we first lock the first to an element, to the first element, and then we sum it up against all the rest of the elements one by one sequentially. If the two elements sum up to target, our result is simply first and second, which is to be returned as a pair inside a list, right? So this is the equation. So for first in range length nums. So what the range function does is that it creates iterators between two input values. Now it can get a bit complex, but I'll try to explain it as we go deeper into the course. So let's say it takes two values, which is start and end. So in Python, always remember that the value that on the right, the value that we are trying to run up to is always excluded. So, and if you don't give it a value of start, it will assume that it starts at 0. So if I do range 0, 10, or let's say 0, 5, this would return iterators. This would return 5 iterators starting from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So these are 5 iterators, right? And then sequentially, as the loop runs, first will be allotted the value of each of those iterators. So when the loop initiates, first will be allotted the value of 0, then it would be allotted the value of 1, then it would be allotted the value of 2, then 3, then 4, and this is allotted once this line executes again. Once it runs out, we fall out of the loop. Now here, let's say that my loop is allotted the value of 0. I want to check it against the second element, which starts from 0 onwards. So 0 onwards is basically just first plus 1, right? First plus 1. So within the loop, I initiate another loop inside this loop, length nums. Now what happens is basically, since we did not give it a start value, it is always going to, if you just give one value to the range function, so length of nums is equal to 5 in this case. So length just returns the count of elements inside a list. So if it has 5 elements, it would return 5. This is not the index, this is the count. To get the index, to get the total number of indexes inside a list, you typically just subtract it by 1. So this would be the last element. And because the range function excludes the value of n from the collection of iterators, which is the value that we run up to, it would be automatically excluded, which is very standard procedure in Python, as you'll find out in indexing and slicing as well. So by default, if I don't give it a start value, it is going to assume that it has been given a value of 0. Since it is assumed to be starting from 0, we don't really write it, but this and this are the same. But in this case, we want to pick the element which is next to the present element, right? So we pick the element second. Second is equal to first plus 1. So I could define a second element, or I could just directly pass it the value first plus 1. Now this is the test condition, so just give it a if. So if this is true, my answer is what? Is first and second. So what this does is it creates a list, an array, like the output that we are seeking. So this would become 0 and 1, because 2 plus 7 is 1, and it would, this is the final answer basically. So this is the result, and then we can return result, right? Now since this is Python, we can just directly do this, and this is just considered a good practice in Python. This is the answer. So, and now let's look at the space-time complexity of this, which is the most important part. The whole point of data structures and algorithms is understanding the space-time complexity, since that is what we are trying to optimize. So if basically if this first, let's try to run it. Yeah, so basically I'm sorry, I made a mistake. The function is actually len, 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 not length. It's an abbreviation for the word length. So as you can see, the output is correct. And yeah, so, and as a fail-safe check, let's say this condition never executes. If this never executes, this is also never executes. So the program falls out of this loop, and then we just return some garbage value. So -1 sounds good to me. What is it supposed to return? It's supposed to return a list. So ideally you should be returning a list, an empty list. So whenever you encounter a return statement, it basically ends the execution of the main function, of the function in which that return statement is written, because we've run out of the scope of the function now, so it has had its useful life, so to speak. So now let's get to space-time complexity of this. So there are two types of complexities, time complexity and space complexity. This is really important, so I'll tell you how to evaluate it. So there are so in this case, the time complexity would be O of n squared. Why? Because for each element, let's say I lock this at 0, then I check it against all the consecutive values, all the remaining values in the input array. Then I pick this first element, check it against all the remaining values, so on and so forth. So when I pick each value, I'm roughly sort of evaluating it against all the other values every time. So for each value, I'm checking it against all the other values, even though I've visited them, right? So the time complexity would be O of n squared, because let's say that 11 is, by the time we run up to 11, 11 has already been visited 2 times, once by this and once by this. So the complexity goes up radically, right? It is visited for each element. All the other elements are visited at least once, roughly speaking, right? So this calculation is kind of rough. So the time complexity has to do with your CPU. Space complexity has to do with your RAM. I'm just making it very simple. So the time complexity would be O of n squared. And since we did not create any additional data structure, now if we did create like integers or float, they don't count. They are considered to have like constant space complexity. But once you turn it into a data structure, which is sort of dynamically expanding, so let's say if I were looping over these and I was storing the result of this in an array, that would count as an additional creation of a new data structure, then the space complexity would be O of n. But in this case, since we've not created any dynamic array, it would just be O of 1, or any sort of dynamic data structure. Now,